The Meet Me for Coffee podcast is on site this week at the Journal of Commerce Inland Distribution Conference 2025 here in one of my favorite cities, Chicago. I'm excited to have a lot of speakers on the show this week, and we're going to be bringing some great content and hearing a lot of really great insights about what's going on in our industry and the broader supply chain. Hi everyone, thank you so much for listening in again to our Meet Me for Coffee podcast. We are recording on site here at the Journal of Commerce Inland Distribution Conference 2025 in Chicago. This is day 2. We're probably going to be releasing this on day 3, but we're going to be having conversations today during day 2 of the conference. I have Josh with me today. Josh, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Samantha. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Would you mind introducing yourself so we know a little bit more about you?
Sure thing. I'm Josh Lyles. I'm the founder for Salesdash CRM. We're one of the only logistics-specific CRMs basically for the logistics industry, for logistics sales teams. We work with a lot of freight brokerages, asset-based carriers that focus on reaching out to shippers. And we have both a shipper and a carrier side to the CRM. So main goal for us is really simplicity and to make it more for the industry, and that's a little bit of what we do.
Awesome. Well, this is going to be fun because anybody who knows me knows sales and brokerage are kind of two of my passions.
Oh, yeah.
So you're a man after my own heart in that regard. So I'd love to just kind of take this as an opportunity to maybe have a discussion around what we see, what we feel in the space right now for anyone who might be listening in. So as someone who works with a lot of brokers who's focused on helping them succeed in sales, what are you seeing right now in the marketplace as far as strategies? What's working? What's out there? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been some interesting stuff where there's a lot of people that will continuously rotate systems and whatnot, which is really common. I always think, honestly, a lot for teams is always to look internally with processes. It always starts there because there's a lot of systems that can actually fit well with what you're doing sometimes in sales, but so much of it has to be with what your plan of attack is and what you're actually trying to go after. So one of the very common things I will say when we're transitioning teams over from a different CRM in specific would just be they have too many leads in their name. It's so common. And when you do that, you're overwhelming not only yourself, but the system in terms of, okay, great, if I'm jumping into the system and I need to know what shippers I need to reach out to today, what I need to do today, shippers, customers, prospects, whatever it may be. It's really easy for a lot of people to get overwhelmed because they have way too many and they don't really know where to start. So a lot of times there can be a cleansing effort in the early days. And so little things that we do in SalesDash are just hey, it's easy to set a maximum account limit for the amount of shippers that you want to reach out to. A popular feature that we have among managers is the shot clock feature. So you just basically say, hey, after X amount of days, if a rep hasn't reached out to a shipper and hasn't reached out to them in, let's just say 45 days, it would automatically move it out of their name. So by nature, I think it helps increase activity, but I think that's a really big one in particular of just lead management and how many leads that you're trying to keep in your name is a big one. I'm sure you see that a lot on the consulting side too.
Yeah, I would say I see two things consistently. One is they either have way too much data and, like you said, too many leads, this whole concept of assignment to someone. I don't like that, even across larger teams. I generally say, if we're transacting, doing business with an account, it can be assigned. If we're not, that's open for prospecting.
Yeah.
And then another problem that I see is almost the opposite, where we still have companies who are struggling to find data and find a good place to go get data for prospecting.
Yeah.
So you kind of have one of two extremes generally, not a whole lot in the middle.
One thing, so we have a little bit of data on that. I wouldn't say it's a ton, but it's in the couple hundreds at least in terms of just a lot of the data providers that a lot of brokers and logistics companies use. So in no particular order, the top 3 that we've at least captured that a lot of people use are ZoomInfo, which is really popular, Seamless AI, and Apollo.io. So those are really common, and the big question always is well, which one do you like best? And based on cost and all this stuff, I think so much it depends on where people are in their journey.
Sure.
And the funny part is we work with over 180 teams actively right now, and when we talk to people, you hear really good things about one system from one person, you hear really bad things about another.
Yes.
And so I do think so much of that requires the due diligence of the team to really dive into the systems, and then some of that also goes into our email is really important for you, our mobile number is really important for you based on the vendor itself.
Sure, and I coach sales across a number of organizations, and I have clients in the technology space, and cold calling is so much more effective than it is for my clients in like the broker space who are selling into shippers. So when we're trying to get a hold of brokers, if I'm a carrier and I want to talk to a broker, picking up a phone is generally a good practice because brokers tend to answer the phone. When I'm a broker trying to call a shipper, picking up a phone is generally a very tough, practice for ROI because they tend to not answer the phone.
Yep.
That doesn't mean they don't ever, so we still do it. But it's interesting that there are, to your point, different modes and then different tools for where you can go get that data, the lead data that you need to make those decisions.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with Zoom and Apollo. I would echo your sentiment there, that each of them have different use cases and kind of pros and cons to them.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into them, and then these tools are also expanding to have more like sales engagement tools and in terms of like, hey, can they offer more than just the contact data? And I would say I think the most important thing is always the contact data. It's like you want to make sure that those platforms, more than I think even the engagements, like you want to make sure emails are accurate, phone numbers are accurate, and that kind of stuff.
So let's say we get data, and so now I am a broker and I have data for who I want to be prospecting. We figured out our assignment and everything. What are you generally seeing as a best practice?
I was going to say, I'm on the Meet Me for Coffee podcast right now, and she doesn't have coffee. I've got coffee,
I just got
and
coffee.
Here we go. So cheers to the coffee.
Cheers to coffee. My coffee deliveries in this conversation is going to get so much better. Awesome. So what is best practice? I think what I see a lot in sales is you're not sure what to do each day as a salesperson. It can get overwhelming. You can log into a system and try to figure out what should I be doing, who should I be reaching out to, how am I driving impact, how do I know if what I'm doing is working, how long do I stick with a process before I try to decide I need to change my process. What do you see as far as like actual processes that help sellers be more effective right now?
Oh, I love this. Number one, it's all over the place. Everybody, I think this one, every now and then on LinkedIn, social, everything, you see people say cold calls are dead, cold emails are dead, social selling, like you see all this stuff. And I just think it's a lot of noise, and you kind of have to block it out because the reality is like all channels work. It really just depends on your volume, and it really depends on, I would honestly say your skill set, right? And like doing those things where it's like, hey, have we given this thing enough reps to actually say, does this approach work or this channel work? And but the interesting part that I see is like some people, I would say a lot of people lean towards emails because it's the comfortable thing to do, right?
It can also be automated or copy pasted, so it's comfortable and sometimes easier for people. Comfortable,
easier, and people love the volume play. There's a lot of people that do like the calls because, and I'm a big fan of calls personally because I just think in terms of like accelerating pipeline, I really do believe it's the fastest way to really get to learn somebody. Is there an opportunity? Qualify, disqualify. Disqualifying is just as important. And visits, like on-site visits. I feel like that's been a big trend that I've kind of seen more and more from a lot of the teams that we're working with.
It's coming back finally, right?
Yeah.
It's being revived. Like rising from the ashes of the pandemic is back in person on site as like an expected, acceptable form of prospecting again.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it probably took a little bit after COVID and people being like, hey, leave me alone for a little bit, and then,
or even like getting back into an office to work.
Right.
Like we've seen more people start choosing office work again, so you have a higher likelihood of actually finding someone in an office.
Very true.
To show up.
Yeah, because that became really tough, right? You try to call this extension and this line going through the main line, and then we're not in office.
It did. Like it slaughtered the cold call, reliability for office direct lines.
Yeah, it made it a lot tougher. And it's just part of the game. But I think you got to lean into it. I think, an omni-channel strategy, doing a little bit of everything's good. It's been really interesting to see people, especially even just like with organic LinkedIn content. I'm sure you probably work with a lot of clients on that kind of stuff, right? Of, hey, like make sure you're connecting with shippers and stuff. You don't talk to people as much about that. In Salesdash, it's very call and email specific.
Do you believe in any of the numbers? Like, is there a certain number of touch points or visibility points that you have to get before there's conversion or there's interest from a prospect?
It's a good question. I mean, I think the main thing in particular, I don't think there's like any, you've seen, there's a lot of stats where people make sure, hey, focus on double-digit amount of touch points around like, 3 channels. We see some interesting stuff of like frameworks that people have of like, 3 touches within X amount of days, within X amount of channels and that stuff. You see there's some stats out there around like, hey, sometimes it can take 21 touch points. I think one of the things that I've been interested in, not only, just as like somebody that previously was in brokerage and then also now in tech and, still selling on a consistent basis, is how buyers are just more informed now because we have so much more information. And, even with things like ChatGPT or whatever, if you're trying to do research on stuff, a lot of them want to have the information for them to make a decision. And so I think that has been interesting because like we've even shifted some stuff in like our sales methodology in terms of like, okay, just think of it of like, how do we get people the information that they need to learn more about us without us like telling them as a salesperson, It's pretty interesting to kind of see how that stuff evolves and like what people are receptive to or not. But I made a post about this not that long, like an hour ago. Had breakfast with a shipper this morning. I just like randomly sat next to a shipper and was talking to him. I'm like, hey, what are you sort of seeing on a day in and day out basis? And he was like, we're getting, I get about 10 to 15 calls a day, 10 plus emails a day. The first thing he said before anything was, I just get a bunch of automated emails. And he's just like, I don't love the automated emails. He's like, I could tell that it's automated. It doesn't feel like there's any effort, or that I'm just like another person in their sequence or whatever it may be. So, again, that's like one data point. But it's interesting to always kind of hear. That's why I like coming to these conferences, and where there are shippers, is you get to hear, hey, like how are people approaching you? What are like the reasons like you're looking to work with somebody? But they'd be a tough one because he said that they went from 12 to 15 carriers 2 years ago. They're working with about 6 to 8 right now. They've only onboarded 1 within the past 2 years. And there's some other interesting stuff. I won't get too long-winded there, but it's fun about this conference.
Oh man, so there's a lot of rules out there in sales. So something you said earlier, I would encourage people to really take to heart. And you said you have to tune out the noise, and that's absolutely correct. If you are a broker, I have yet to find a more competitive, difficult environment to sell in. And so if you're going to go listen to, like a mainstream sales podcast or something and try to take advice from that, like be very careful, like are we talking B2B sales, B2B or services, goods, like so B2C, who are we taking advice from? But another thing is, and you brought this up too, it's so dependent on the person and their skill set. And so I think for sales managers, it's a lot about trying to identify what is your seller's like, what is that thing they're really good at that helps them drive more conversion. I work with sales teams and I love video, like using a video in an email template, like sending a custom video or in a LinkedIn message. Some people make amazing videos that you're drawn into. Some people are like, I will die if you make me record a video, and nobody's going to want to ever see that thing. And it's true, like some people have this affinity for certain things.
Of course.
And then others like great on the phone, but then others are like not so comfortable on the phone but can make these videos, or vice versa. So it's really about trying to find what their thing is that they do really well, and then helping to kind of, I guess, exploit that throughout their sales cycle and process.
Yeah.
Also, something I've heard that I kind of abide by is the 95-5 rule in sales, where I say that 95% of your prospects are not in an active buying cycle when you are prospecting them.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. Like so 5% of the people out there that could maybe ever be your client might be in a buy cycle. So when we have to get to those 5%.
Right.
But by nature of sales, I think when you are looking at people jump around their processes and this isn't working and this isn't working, I like to remind people that we're playing in the single-digit percentages of success. Like if you're getting a 5 to 10% response rate, that is fantastic. Yeah. If you are converting at a meeting rate at 2 to 5%, great, right? We only have 5% of our prospects even considering or being open-minded. And so we're playing a numbers game here where for every 99 no's, it might be that one yes, but that's a win.
But that's what you go after, right? And you got to celebrate that one yes. And there's even so many nuances in that of like, hey, like what are the small wins in the conversations, right? Of like, some people consider, like send me your information and all that kind of stuff. And then sometimes like that can be a win. Sometimes it could actually be, hey, like it's actually an objection on one side. One thing I did find interesting in the conversation I had with the shipper, he was talking a little bit about effort. And what was unique is he said, one thing that sticks out to me is the people that are desperate because the market's bad. But he's like, I actually really pay attention to who reaches out to me when things are good, because it really shows me that people actually want to like work with us and they feel that they have a position to work with us.
Yeah.
And that was kind of an interesting take because, I mean, obviously it's really easy in a down market for a lot of people. They're desperate, like they're looking for customers. Rates are really low, and he had mentioned that. But he did say he does pay attention to when things are good. Like, are people actually still making a conscious effort to try to earn the business?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I won't give it all away, but the North American freight market outlook today said that there's some reason to be optimistic in Q2 26 for some recovery. So definitely, I tell people to be consistently reaching out right now, but then organize yourself in a way that you're. Assume they have a 1 or 2 month window where they're in that buy cycle. That's a whole year you got to cover to make sure you find that buy cycle. So
big time.
Stick with it. Well, I have another question. You mentioned briefly before we started that you guys have kind of expanded. You've been growing as a company, and you have some carriers now using your system too as a CRM, which I think is really exciting. And I feel like that's kind of like a shift in our marketplace where asset carriers now are starting to step up and say, hey, we want to have a sales structure and a sales organization. So how have you seen that evolve in the time you've been building Salesdash CRM?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because historically, like, we have typically reached out to brokers because brokers are much better about just facilitating some kind of sales process and having some kind of organization. But we've onboarded more carriers recently. That, sometimes they have a small brokerage division. They're really just focused on keeping their assets moving, working on their network strategy and that kind of stuff. But really, it's like getting organized. Like it always starts there. And so many of these teams, everybody's got stuff in separate places. Spreadsheets is very common. I will say on the carrier side, what we've seen is typically they're going to have more of like the legacy tools, and I will say brokers typically have, maybe some of the vendors that you may see at the conferences that are a little bit newer and maybe pushing innovation a little bit more. So that's always kind of interesting to see. But it kind of comes from, it just sounds like, all right, hey, we're trying to get more organized as a team and get on a better page of like, what is everybody actually doing? And there can be a lot of crossover on that side too, where they're maybe working with more enterprise shippers. And it requires, I think, definitely more organization and like the team being on the same page of, okay, if they've got 10 plus contacts, or if they've got just a number of different locations and divisions that they're working with, there's a big aspect in terms of like, well, who's doing what, and then what do we actually know in terms of like who's actually called, who's emailed, what have we talked with them about, what do we know about this division, what do we know about that location. And so that's been fun to work with some more of these carrier sales teams.
I find interesting, and maybe this is more like a message for the brokers to be aware of, but I have worked with carriers who want to work with the brokers, right? Like brokers are excellent customers for a carrier. So a carrier goes to reach out to a broker, and you reach out to like carrier management, carrier procurement, and you're sending like these sales type of emails, and they're not getting responses, like they're being ignored. And I'm just like, that always kind of stumps me a little bit, because I'm like, if I'm a carrier manager and a carrier is like selling their capacity to me, why am I not interested by that? But I think it's a good question. It needs to be a conversation by leadership, right, with these brokerages. Like, we need to start forming relationships with carriers before we need the capacity, understanding their needs. And so I know your CRM has a feature for the carrier side to build out like information around these carriers. Yep. So it's a dual-sided CRM. Yes, we need to know about our shippers, but we also need to know about our carriers. And then I think we need to also start considering, what do we do when we receive an email in from a carrier? Because carriers are starting to sell themselves. Like traditionally, like write emails and send emails to brokers introducing themselves, essentially cold emailing. And they're still getting low response rates, and that's honestly kind of mind-blowing to me, because I'm like, they're serving up their capacity to you, and you don't know how to respond. And you got to
just go sell it, right? Like, hey, you get to go talk about what lanes they run, what equipment they.
I think that's a conversation about like carrier sales is really sales, where you have to understand two customers. And
big
really
time. I mean, I think that's what people miss is, you see like the relationship where I think, thrown out there so much. But I mean, at the end of the day, that requires effort. That requires really knowing the other party and what they do and how you can help them. And I mean, that's how you build it. And it's not just like, hey, you helped me out on this one time. Like, there are going to be times where like you need to help them out in certain instances, right? Like that, good times, bad times. I don't know. I think that's what ultimately helps develop with the relationships. And it is interesting to see. And like, I think I think a couple things on like this. There's so many different areas that we could go on this, but on the shipper side, one thing that our CRM does is it helps brokers in particular if they're learning about specific lanes that a shipper runs or if they get a quote. It's really hard to put that stuff in a generic CRM because it's not typically fit well, right? Like you got an origin, you got a destination, an equipment type, a mode, all that kind of stuff. So we have a structured way for the brokers to capture that stuff for shipper sales or for carrier sales team. On the carrier side, what's kind of helped naturally progress with this was we actually initially built it because some of our customers were saying, hey, we've got carrier reps, they've just got a spreadsheet of these are their top carriers by name, this is the equipment that they have, these are the lanes that they like to run, this is how many dry vans or flatbeds, reefers that they have, etc. And we want to put this all, if we have 10 reps or 5 reps, 20 reps, we want to put this all in one place so that way, instead of us having to shoot a message on Teams or on Slack or over email or walk to the other person's desk and be like, hey, Samantha, do you have a carrier out of Lakeland, Florida that can, with a reefer, I'm trying to get out of there or whatever it may be. It just makes it easier because in the system you can type in the city, you can type in, input the equipment type and just get that information really quick. And you can call those carriers, you can email them, if 6 of them pop up and you want to offer them a spot load or, hey, if we're moving this lane 3 times a week, and you want to basically get those rates, like we're seeing all that activity now in the CRM. So it's been this really cool, interesting progression, but ultimately it's to say, I think for us on the carrier side of the system, it's how do we just help brokers and anybody, like how do we just help you drive more activity to offer carriers more freight?
It's increasing carrier reutilization.
Yes,
and
exactly.
So this makes me unpopular to a lot of people, but something that I would say, and we're going to have to wrap this up here, so we'll leave it with this, is a lot of it comes down to the way brokers have been fundamentally structured for decades, literally decades. So like now we have this ability where there's still brokers out there who a carrier rep sets up an asset fleet with 100 trucks and then hoards the capacity within their own book. And that capacity doesn't have access to the rest of that broker's, you name it, billion-dollar network.
All the other,
So how are we information sharing across the entire brokerage? How is a carrier able to actually tap into their entire book of business? Well, now you're going to have conversations around compensation and who's actually managing that carrier relationship. And so it's messy, but it's something that we're all going to have to start working on, right?
Yeah.
Like, because tools are advancing, sales processes are advancing, relationships are becoming more important than ever. Brokers are gaining market share, which is really exciting. For anybody who's listening that's missed that, the broker market share increased during the pandemic and then even after, and then hasn't gone back down, and actually there's predictions that it'll continue to increase
What's the most recent percentage
through the
that's
next
been
couple
thrown
of
out?
years.
Do you know?
I mean, I think brokers went from like sub 20% to like in the 30s during the pandemic, and we're still holding close to that. So I mean, yeah, you have your large asset players, but they're actually saying now that like you think technology, you think fraud, you think about all these topics. They're saying shippers see brokers as like a strategic investment to kind of offload some of the risk to their broker partners to manage the insurance and the legal and all of these things, and to bring the technology in. Because brokers are pretty good at adapting, the newest forms of technology and the tracking and the visibility and all of the things. So, I mean, it's a great time, in my opinion, to be a broker, but it's also a great time to take a really hard internal look at our sales processes, our carrier sales processes, figure out how we need to structure things moving forward.
It's really interesting to be on the tech side. I think like we have leaned more into like, I say honestly, like basic fundamental stuff of brokerage versus maybe some of like the shiny, sexy marketing stuff, and that's by choice. But it also, like, I mean, everything for us is very customer led. Like we just listen to customers and what they're looking for and what problems they're trying to solve. And however we can help them on a sales basis, like that's what we're trying to do. And it is kind of interesting, but like even going back to the sales channels and like, people knocking on doors and stuff, I think so much of this stuff, it's like this cycle where like you do this stuff to help get you there, you transition to some stuff, but you may always come back to the thing that helped get you there, or like you sprinkle that back in if you totally went away from it originally. So it's fun to watch how people adapt strategies on that stuff.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today, but thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
If people have any questions about sales or anything that we discussed, I would challenge you to go ahead and drop it in the comments. Josh or myself, we'd love to jump in and hear some of your questions or what your thoughts are on any of the topics we discussed today. And Josh is on LinkedIn. That's a great way to connect with him, so be sure to check out his page, give him a follow, send him a connection request, any questions that you might have after listening to our episode today. And Josh, thank you for the time.
Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for meeting us for coffee.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Meet Me for Coffee podcast. We're recording on-site at the Journal of Commerce Inland Distribution Conference this week. If you like this episode, be sure to check out our channels where we'll have multiple others published here this week with content from the show. And in just a couple of weeks, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming, discussing where freight markets and economics meet. I hope you guys can meet us for coffee.